Hey y'all, my name is Priscilla and welcome back to my channel, Bookie Charm. For today's video, I'm going to be telling you about some recent reads. So this year, I've been falling behind, catching you up on some of the fiction reads that I've been reading this year. I feel like I have a number of dedicated videos this year focused on nonfiction, so really that's the only theme we have going here. I want to tell you about some fiction books that I haven't talked about on camera yet and that I don't have slated for videos planned in the future this year. So there's no rhyme or reason other than that, but let's go ahead and get started. So the first book that I want to tell you about is called Pan's Labyrinth, and this is the book adaptation of the film by Guillermo del Toro. The book was adapted with Guillermo del Toro and Cornelia Funke. So Pan's Labyrinth is one of those classic cult films by Guillermo del Toro that I'm late to the game for because I am going to embarrassingly admit that I hadn't seen the movie and in its entirety at least, because I grew up in the Tumblr generation where I feel like I knew the movie based on clips and GIFs. And I picked up this book mostly as a collector's item because it's just gorgeous, and I ended up really enjoying it. And I thought it was really entertaining and dark and creepy and very closely, if not almost directly, adapted from the film. Ophelia, the little girl, the main character in this book, is in 1940s Spain, and she and her mother are moving in with her new stepdad, who is a Spanish general. He's a very cruel and evil man, and she's approached by Pan, who is this magical faun, one night. From there, her life changes drastically, and it's an exploration of evil in both everyday life, but also in magical worlds, and the future that Ophelia may have if she accepts it. It is hard to say if you'll get anything from this book if you are a huge fan of the film, because it is so closely adapted from the film. There are snippets in this that do have some extra context for some of the famous characters, the Pale Man, the clockmaker, the faun. So that's there. I think it's a great introduction if you're into fairy tales and you want to approach the story in a different sort of medium. So the next two books I read is part of the Austen read along, and first I read Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. This is Jane Austen's first book, I think published posthumously, but her first actual fully written novel. And it follows Catherine, who is a 17-year-old girl as she's coming of age and as she's socializing around Bath, and she becomes good friends with the Tinley siblings and falls in love. And it's a satire because I think it's a commentary on culture, on misogyny, and on women's lives in England in the 1800s. So this book, I think, is not Jane Austen's best work. It was definitely my least favorite of the books that I've read from her so far, because I felt like the satire was so heavy-handed, almost like hitting you over with the head with, hey, don't take this too seriously. But I felt it was almost mocking the reader, like, don't forget that this is satire. I'm aware it's satire, I get it. And Austen also interjects a lot with these random commentaries. I do enjoy Austen's humor and her wit. I think it's top-notch and really sharp, and I know why people enjoy her writing so much and why it has lasted and stood the test of time, because she's pretty funny. And I do enjoy hearing her thoughts on things, especially Catherine in this book, but I just didn't really care about the relationship with the man that she's supposed to be with. I even forgot his name because I don't care about him. It started to become a chore to continue to read this book outside of those initial interactions where we see a lot of the main understanding of people and who they are and why Catherine likes them and doesn't like them. Outside of that, I didn't really care to follow them throughout the novel, so that's why it ended up not being a favorite. The next book I read by Jane Austen is Sense and Sensibility, and this is a book that follows sisters. And the first thing I learned after reading this book was that sensibility in the time of Jane Austen means something completely different than it does in our current times. Sense is more of like the logical, practical sister and Eleanor, and sensibility at this time was more of the impulsive, almost emotionally inclined sister. So we follow mostly Eleanor, who is the oldest sister, and Marianne, who is the younger sister, and they both represent the sense and sensibility respectively. And common themes here again, we see relationships to women, to men, with the limited resources and maneuver mobility that they have in society after the Dashwoods' father passes away. away. Of course, they have to marry off these siblings. These sisters are trying to find someone to hold down their bank accounts and to be able to survive. I liked this book much more than I liked Northanger Abbey. I liked the sibling relationships between Eleanor and Marianne the most. A lot of this book is spent with Marianne making rash decisions and being very emotional and dramatic, and with Eleanor trying to help her through these dramatic episodes. However, outside of Eleanor and Marianne's relationship, I found it hard to connect with a lot of Jane Austen's other characters, which is a thing that I'm realizing as I read more of Jane Austen's work. Maybe her work just isn't for me. A lot of the world building is just not interesting to me. A lot of her books begin with the understanding of whose family is who, what reputations they have, where they stand in terms of property and finances, and that's all fine. But once we actually get to the characters, because I'm such a character-driven person, I've got to care about more than just the main characters if we're going to focus a lot of time on all these other side relationships. And it's just really hard for me to get invested in people outside of the main characters, outside of Eleanor and Marianne and Catherine. I don't know. I'm kind of scared to read more of Jane Austen, because am I going to be that person that really dislikes Jane Austen? I mean, I might be that person. So there's that. But I do like that her characters are faced with really impossible decisions of having to be married off for the sake of family, for the sake of stability, but also seeking happiness on their own terms. So I like those themes. I like that the characters focused on in these books are so great. So I will try to continue reading more of Jane Austen's work, but it's definitely not going to be a priority, and that's why I fell off with the Austen read-along. Then I read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone. This is an SFF novella that centers on a queer relationship. We have Red and Blue, who are fighting as spies on opposite ends on different sides of the same time war, and they go on these secret missions through different threads of time and space, and they start to write each other letters, get to know each other, and it's an enemies to lovers relationship. This book is very, very ambitious in its writing style, and it won't work for a lot of people because of it, because it's very abstract and strange, and if you try to make too much sense out of it, I don't know if you'll get along with the writing at all. I was on the brink of DNFing it after the first chapter, but I'm glad I stuck it out because I ended up really, really loving it. What I like about books like this is they kind of force you to engage with texts and stories in a full sensory sort of way. This book alternates between sections about the specific missions that these spies go under, and then the actual letters that they write to each other, and how they get to know each other, and how they end up falling in love with each other. And for me, once that clicked for me, once I realized that it doesn't even matter who wins this war, what steps they take, because the war is ongoing. They're just very small parts in a larger universe. But then the letters are what grounds you, what grounds the reader in their stories, because love, at the end of the day, romance that is that everlasting, is what really matters outside of all the other crap that they have to do, that their responsibilities and obligations. It's the romance. It's finding someone that understands you, that is what really matters. That is what makes sense. And I really, really love that. I love that message, and I really, really love this novella. Then I read Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab. This is a middle grade paranormal fantasy that is about a young girl who, with her parents, investigates these ghost stories. I didn't enjoy this. Full disclosure, I didn't read the first book in this series. I don't think that I missed too much because there's a full recap of the first book in this sequel. But this book did not work for me, and it's one of the lowest ranked books that I've read this year. Cassidy Blank is a character that can see ghosts, and she works with her ghost hunter parents, and they visit Paris to document as part of their TV show in the catacombs. And she has a ghost best friend named Jacob, and it sort of just takes off from there on their adventures. I did not like Cassidy Blake. So because she's such an unlikable person, I thought maybe I just didn't get along with Schwab's writing style, but then I came to realize that Cassidy Blake is just a really horrible friend that doesn't even see Jacob and her friendship until she realizes that, hey, Jacob actually has a story outside of my existence. Maybe I should think about him more than I do. That is one thing I hate about books about friendship like this, like middle grade like this, that doesn't have good friendships, are always going to be like a deal breaker. Along with that, there's just a number of things in middle grade that I don't like. I don't like it when parents are completely oblivious to the actions of their kids and that these kids have to continuously work around them instead of working together. I hate it that this book like talked down to the reader, almost as if kids are too stupid to understand anything unique to French culture. There's just a lot of things about this middle grade I didn't like. I don't recommend it. So next up, I want to tell you about People's Future for the United States, edited by Victor Lavalle. This is an anthology of SFF short stories written by a lot of different authors with various different writing styles that begs the question of what future do we envision for citizens, for future people of the United States. And it's a question of justice, of resistance and equity for a lot of marginalized people, for LGBTQ plus people, for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. I really enjoyed a lot of these essays. A lot of them feel very hopeful. A lot of them speak to a lot of the fears that marginalized folks have in our times right now, in our political landscape right now. Also, side note, its title is inspired by A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. In this book, it's sort of a perspective of history that we don't usually see from people that were actually affected by wide sweeping legislation, like Indigenous people, like the impoverished middle class to lower class. That's what this book seeks to do, and I think that's what Victor Lavalle was seeking to do with his anthology by seeking out marginalized writers to give sort of a speculative look of what they think the future could look like. Lavalle's introduction in this book, I think, is one of my favorites in a really long time, because I think that he just hits all the notes and doesn't stray away from any of the fears that people have, but still makes you feel hopeful and still makes you feel like you're in power of your own destiny and that we all have a role to play in moving forward into the future. So it's hard to kind of talk about all the essays in this book, but to give you a glimpse of what's in this, there's stories in here about tattoos being used as the last books. There's sort of a wish fulfillment story that's inspired by Donald Trump and how there's just genetic time bomb. And there's virtual realities. They're used as conversion therapies for queer folks and how the resistance comes out of that. There is dragons by N.K. Jemisin. Thank you, N.K. Jemisin, for our dragons story, and so many good other ones. So if you're intimidated by short story collections, I'd also recommend the audiobook because it is narrated by a full cast, and that's a great way to consume this. But really enjoyed this collection. Highly recommend it. Next up, I read To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This is an SFF novella that follows a team of astronauts, scientists, and engineers as they travel about space, and specifically 4 different planets, in search of research data. This is an extremely emotional and character-driven story that also seeks to understand humanity and the obligations that we have to not destroying the things that we are trying to understand. I've read other books by Becky Chambers, other sci-fi books by her, and I think that she does character relationships really well. She also does a lot of great representation and its own voices for the queer representation in this book specifically. So I really love the balance in this book that is done with the very intimate and tender tone, but also the very vast feeling of it because of this sense of wonder and this love of science. The main character in this book is asking a lot of ethical questions, specifically because they are disconnected from humanity, from Earth, as they're also getting to know each other and understand life outside of Earth. It's a really interesting take on the understanding of terraforming and change and the way that humans impact other life forces and what obligation we have to other life forces. We can learn from others and not conquer. We don't always have to be seen as at the top of the food chain. We can learn without hurting others. And the ending of this book, I think, is what most people are hung up on. It is a bit of a curious ending, I'll say that, but it didn't really bother me too much, and I still think that it's a pretty well done novella. Next up, I read Stand Up, Yumi Chung by Jessica Kim. This is a middle grade story that follows a shy Korean American girl that wants to be a stand-up comic. One day, Yumi Chung is mistaken as another student of this comedy camp, and she takes that opportunity to, in secret, under the guise of another student, attend classes to really hone in on her craft and take strides toward a career that she really, really loves and wants to do. And it's something that she has to do in secret because her parents are immigrants from Seoul that have a struggling Korean barbecue restaurant and definitely don't want to be investing money into what they see as unstable career for Yumi. I really, really enjoyed this book. It's a story about the relationships between immigrants and their children and the dance and act that a lot of kids of immigrants like myself have to do with trying to respect your parents' decisions and the path that they've set for you, but also wanting to do things your own way. It's something that a lot of immigrant children, I think, will understand and will connect to. Because it's really interesting that Yumi, while she's attending these comedy classes, her older sister actually drops out of medical school. And they're both trying so hard to make sure that they're doing the right thing before they tell their parents because they don't want to disappoint them. That's definitely something you don't hear about from white kids, from kids of privileged backgrounds, that they never have to deal with these issues. I think Kim nails it right on the head when she's discussing these vulnerable moments between Yumi and her father and her parents. And I think she does it in a very lighthearted way. Another thing I love about middle grade is hitting these hard issues and also coming out with a happy ending, somewhat of a hopeful ending at the same time. That's done really well in this book. I didn't expect to enjoy a story about comedy as much as I did. There's really interesting moments of understanding timing and authenticity and vulnerability in Yumi's stand-up comic, and that's what makes her a better comic, but also makes her a better daughter. So it's a really, really great story, and I highly recommend you read it. Okay, so I've been talking for way too long. So the last book that I want to tell you about today is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is an Own Voices Afro-Latinx Dominican story about siblings Yahaira and Camino Rios who find out about each other when their father unexpectedly passes away in a plane crash. So I don't think it goes without saying, this is Acevedo's third book, and in my mind it's her third hit because I really, really love the story about siblings and about grief and forgiveness and a connection to family and culture and your homeland, which I think is some of the minor themes in the story, because she talks about a lot of different things, about poverty, about colorism, about misogyny, sexual harassment, and immigration. I think that she does these stories so well with such a emotional and really impactful voice. This book is also in verse, so I would highly recommend Acevedo's narration of it, along with a new audiobook narrator who I will put her name on the screen. I was introduced to through this book because that audiobook is spectacular, and I will listen to all her books if she's gonna be narrating her audiobooks, especially the books in verse, because that impact is just unmatched. So I think that at the heart of this novel is this idea of forgiveness and grief. And I think that some reviewers have been saying that they didn't like that some of these topics, because so much is done in this book, are not detailed enough, that aren't explored enough. I think that it takes an astounding amount of privilege to reckon with a lot of these realities, and some Latinx folks just don't have the time, the energy, the self-reflection in order to address all the isms out there, the racism, the misogyny, the immigration issues, the poverty. They don't have the space to do that. And I think that because grief is also an added layer in this book, that some of those are touched here and there. One nitpicky thing that I will say I didn't like about this book was the ending. And it's a plot device that was used to drive these sisters together. That's something that I think was one flaw, but honestly, it's such a minor thing in the larger scope of this book and what this book was doing that I still think this is a well-deserved 5-star book for me. And I will champion it forever because I think we need more stories from Afro-Latinx authors about Afro-Latinx girls that have happy endings. And that's what this book does. That's what this book has. Even out of all the horrible things that happened to some of these characters and the horrible thing that started this journey with these sisters to meet and find each other, they still have a happy ending. So I think that that's why I love this book a lot, and it's really beautiful written, flawlessly executed. So read Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. You won't be disappointed. All right, y'all. So those are all the books that I want to talk to you about today. My voice is starting to get hoarse, so I'll definitely make sure to put a bunch of other books reviews together for another recent reads video in the future. If you've read any of these books, please let me know in the comments down below. If you want to read them now, let me know that too. Or if you just want to say hi, that's really cool as well. But that's all I have to say for this video today. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye.